If you would like to earn CPE credit for listening to the show, visit earmarkcpe.com/FPA. Download the app, take a short quiz, and get your CPE certificate. Finally, if you enjoy listening to FP&A today, please go to your podcast platform of choice, click the subscribe button, and leave a rating and review of the show. And now, on to the show.
From Data Rails, this is FP&A Today.
Welcome to FP&A Today. I'm your host, Glenn Hopper. Today, I'm joined by Aurelien Nolf, Vice President of FP&A and Investor Relations at Lyft. Aurelien has built his career at the intersection of numbers and narrative, starting in audit and accounting, spending more than 15 years at Electronic Arts in both controllership and FP&A leadership roles, and now leading both financial planning and investor relations for one of the most recognized names in mobility. At Lyft, he's helped to drive profitability, scale a global FP&A team, and shape the company's investor story. We're going to talk about his unique dual role, how finance leaders can bridge data with storytelling, and where FP&A is headed in an era of AI and data science. Aurelien, welcome to the show.
Hi, Glenn. Great to be here. Thank you for having me.
So I don't want to dwell on the past, but I was just out in Redwood City on the Electronic Arts campus, which it was one of the coolest campuses I've been to, seeing all the video game stuff and the big Madden field out there and everything. I know you started in audit and accounting before moving into FP&A at Electronic Arts, and now you're leading FP&A and IR at Lyft. And I guess I was quick to jump into Electronic Arts, but I want to go back just before that when you were in audit and accounting. Walk me through what motivated that transition and how your accounting foundation sort of shaped your approach to FP&A and what you've done since then.
Yeah, I spent a few years at PwC at the beginning of my career. And, that's been a great foundation for, who I became as a finance professional. Audit taught me a lot around, verifying your numbers, but more importantly, thinking about the why behind the numbers. I remember going in the corridors and meeting with all the accounting teams and looking at the inventory, going to the warehouses. So I've been building pretty deep knowledge of the businesses. And that was a great foundation. But, the reason why I switched to first accounting at EA, really love the business. As you said, it's a great company. It's pretty awesome. But then transitioning to FP&A just because I really love, business decisions. Like I'm really interested in discussing about the business behind the numbers. I love, storytelling. That's what really energized me. But the accounting is still, serving me daily, honestly. It's making sure all our forecasts are grounded in reality, that all the assumptions are defensible. And, knowing about how a transaction is going to flow through a balance sheet and then your statement of cash flow is super important for FP&A people as well. My son is in college right now. He's learning about accounting, and I really push him to, get started with audit. I think it's a great start for any career in finance.
I love hearing about your son. My kids, neither of them wanted to touch finance, accounting, business. They both, so my son was a STEM guy in college and he's applying to PhD programs now. And my daughter went, like public policy and political science for her dual major. And they couldn't go into business. So I love hearing about it. And it's interesting though, I talked to so many accountants whose children, and I was, I came up through FP&A and finance, not the accounting side. And it seems like on the accounting side, like their kids pick it up. It's like, well, this is a pretty practical way to go. And I see it a lot more in straight accounting than finance, that having that accounting basis. And I guess it's like Warren Buffett said, accounting is the language of business. So if you speak that, you've got the foundation, whichever direction you ultimately go.
Absolutely. Yeah.
One thing that I thought was interesting, and maybe this is just my anecdotal view of it, but once you get to a company, when I've seen people make the move, and I know you were at PwC before, but once you're at a company, to move from accounting to finance within the same company seems like it can be a difficult shift because you kind of get stuck in a lane, and they say, oh, well, he does accounting, so that's kind of the career progression. Can you walk me through how you decided to make that shift into finance, and maybe what lessons within the same company, what lessons from that experience still kind of guide how you work today?
Yeah, I'd say first and foremost, I've been very fortunate. EA is a very supportive organization. They support people and career growth. And so they gave me the opportunity. I think even when I was on the accounting team at EA, I was very oriented toward the business conversations, like accounting being the translation of what happens in the business. And so it was kind of a natural thing for me to do. And the first opportunity I had for within FP&A was corporate FP&A. And so the corporate FP&A team within the brand of FP&A is clearly the place where accountants can transition pretty easily, because you need a lot of those skill sets, the foundations, the rigor, the detail orientation to be successful in those roles. And so from there, I evolved and, took more of a business FP&A role. But the transition happened pretty naturally there. But again, picking the company that is going to help you grow your career and not, just grow people in their silo made a big difference for me. And I've been very fortunate to be within that organization for sure.
That's great. And I love your role now at Lyft. And we talked about this a lot before the show, just because I've got another question on that, but the two audiences you serve. So at Lyft, you're overseeing both FP&A and IR. And so I guess before we talk about, I feel like there has to be challenges around that. But from your perspective and what you've seen in combining the roles, maybe first, was that by design initially, or was one of them something you picked up after the other? But from your experience now doing both, what's the value of combining the two functions under a single leader?
Yeah, it's something that happened over time. When I joined Lyft initially, my focus was on FP&A. And then over time, I had, conversations with our CFO, Erin Brewer. She's been very supportive of me. And, I wanted to combine both because there's a great alignment between the two functions, right? Like if you think about the forecast, that's the way we build guidance, right? That's the foundation of our guidance that we share externally. Having both under the same team, it eliminates the telephone game, right? Like I know exactly what's included in the forecast that have been used to create a guidance. It means also that I think we are able to do a better job at crafting a story that is more authentic. Right, the rideshare Lyft business is very complicated. There's a lot of data, many different markets, many things happen in the market. And so being able to really understand the operational drivers, not just the numbers, but the business that is behind it, makes a big difference. And then the other way is also true. I get a lot of feedback from investors. Oh my God, we get a lot of feedback from them. And that feeds directly into the planning process. So it's also a two-way street that I think has been very interesting.
Yeah. And and this is what we talked about mostly before the show. It feels like that ability to partition your brain, it has to be, because there's very different messages, and being a public company, obviously you've got what you can and can't say to investors and should and shouldn't. And then what you use for internal management and guidance, they're very different. Like you said, they are aligned, but at the same time, sort of the controlling the information and keeping that audience in mind. So and this, I might be like making too big of a deal out of this, but is there a way that you have to kind of partition your brain when switching between that internal planning with executives and the external communication with the investors?
100%. I mean, it's getting easier now. I've been doing that for a longer time, but at the beginning, it was my biggest challenge. The good news is it's just a different lens, right? Like it's the same story, it's the same truth, obviously. It's just that internally we are going very granular. We're looking at scenarios. Obviously, we know things in advance. Last week we announced a very big deal between Lyft and Waymo, which is super exciting. So I've been working on this for months on my FP&A role, but then investors have been asking about it, and I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. And so you have to really be able to separate the two, but the key is consistency, right? And as a company, we want to be very transparent, guide investor the right way. And so everything we say is the truth. It's just a different level of detail.
Yeah, that's a very important point. It's not like you're withholding or telling a different, a different story that has different outcomes. It's just the type of information. So that makes complete sense. We talk about it all the time on the show because it's such a pivotal part of our role that when you're just studying accounting or finance and the kind of the ivory tower of education, you don't really start to realize how important storytelling is with what we do. Because it seems like, we're just learning how to do the numbers and create the ratios and the formulas and everything we're going to track, and this is how we do it. But being able to get that story across, whether it's internally or on the IR side. But it's crafting that story and then knowing the key pieces of information to pass on to whichever audience. So when you're thinking about, I guess, both executives and investors, how do you decide what metrics matter the most and where to shine that light and where that focus is? And is it consistent? I mean, I know there are your key metrics that you track quarter over quarter, but are there factors, levers that drive, hey, we're going to really focus on this one area this quarter, or that kind of drive that?
Yeah, it's actually a very important conversation because, today companies have so many data points, right? Like we have so many data points every day. And so it's easy to be distracted. But, we try to start with what creates the value for the company, for the business. And so in the Lyft example, that would be active riders or frequency or, margin. And then depending on the audience, you're going to go very deep or not very deep, right? So internally or executive, they need, early warning indicators that something is going wrong, right? So we focus on the same metrics, but that's the reason why we focus on them is that's helping us understanding what's going on in the business. But for investors, they are using the same metrics, but for them, it's more about understanding growth, right? And where we're going as a company. And so it's an evolving thing, and those metrics are meant to change all the time. But we need metrics that are both predictive internally and that are going to be meaningful externally. And usually the operational metrics are much better than just the financial ones because they tell more a story about what's in the underlying business as opposed to just the financial output, which everybody can find in our disclosures.
Yeah. And you talked about the way investors use it for making estimates and forecasts for the company. And I think one of the things that you've spoken about before, and this is such a key shift to make, because it's easy. And I feel like as the CFO's role and as the role of finance has evolved over the last couple of decades, it used to be, like you said, if you're doing financial metrics, it's a lot of lagging sort of P&L metrics is what people were looking at. But to the shift and being able to focus on what is going to drive growth going forward. What are we looking at that's more of a leading indicator on where we're headed? But making that shift, I know is something you've spoken about before. And I'm wondering, with that in mind, how has that changed what you're looking at and sort of the whole decision-making process at Lyft?
Pretty much everything. I mean, it's been I'd say a big transformation. When I think about the way we close our books every month, and when the FP&A team is driving reporting, the real estate that is occupied by metrics became, bigger and bigger. Like it's clearly something that we are now focusing on. And then at the end of the day, we look at the lagging indicator, which is the P&L. But when we look at our business, we really focus on the riders, on their frequency, the number of drivers. We look, region by region. We look more and more at rider cohorts and, how they behave and how they spend money and how we retain them. And so when we do that, not only are we able to explain our financials, but we are also able to guide the business and help them make better business decisions. So it's not just about the bottom line and the profit, but it's more about the business. Now, it's a very challenging thing to do because historically, the financial systems and everything we do as a team has not been designed, to handle this complexity. It was really designed, the link between your ERP and your FP&A system, very basic things. And so we have to integrate more and more of those metrics in our forecasting processes, which, many new tools are now helping people do.
Yeah, it's so interesting talking to anyone in finance and accounting these days, because if you think about where we were trained, I mean, it's obviously our domain expertise in finance and accounting, but we're more and more having to become technology experts, and we need to understand the software that we're using. I guess it goes hand in hand with data and analytics, but once you start looking at data and data governance, you end up kind of leaning into having to be a bit of a data scientist almost and have those approaches. I'm wondering, as you talk about linking systems and when you are looking for those key the main KPIs that you're looking at, the things that are levers that can control the business. How much do you feel like you're going outside of sort of the finance domain and having to be a data sleuth or investigator and understand more about analytics maybe than you initially did? Are you having to lean a lot into that and understanding the data outside of systems and then just looking at data going across systems? How much focus do you have there?
Yeah, it's a huge focus. I don't think we are yet there, but honestly, the future of FP&A is clearly hybrid between, finance people and data science. It's clearly at the intersection of both. Pretty much everything that is driving our business and helps us tell a story is not available in our financial systems, right? I mean, just if you just start with that, you can download all the information from our ERP on our forecasting system. You're not going to be able to tell a story, right? And so we have to go to the data science teams, to their SQL models and all those things to be able to craft a narrative and really understand what's going on. And so historically it's been a lot of FP&A asking questions and then this back and forth movement between the two teams. But clearly it's more the lines are blurring right now, and it's clearly the future of FP&A is clearly hybrid. It's key, right? We need to connect the data and to the business story, and then connect this business story to the financial results. Otherwise, you're just a spreadsheet nerd and you don't know anything about what's going on. And by the way, FP&A is all about creating connection with the business leaders. And if you don't know their business well, you are useless to them. And so being relevant and having a seat at the table really requires us to make that shift.
Yeah, and we're going to, because I talked to all guests about it, we're going to dig into AI and automation a little bit more later. But I also think it doesn't matter what industry or profession you're in. There's the existential crisis right now around AI and automation, and is it going to take our jobs? But to the point of what you just said, where we provide value to the business is not in being that spreadsheet jockey. It's not in, oh, he makes really great formulas. It is, what do we do with that information? And I think that as automation gets better and as technology gets better and systems get better and at wrangling this data, and that we're not spending all of our time sort of assembling the data and we have it, we can lean more into that value. And you mentioned the storytelling and telling the story, whether it's to investors or internal management. And I'm wondering, with all that information, whatever the state is now, where you still have to spend a lot of time aggregating and consolidating and coalescing data to get to the numbers you want, but then you have to shift and be able to convey that to someone in a way that isn't just a wall of numbers and ratios and sort of too much information. So I'm wondering, once you gather all that and have that information, how do you connect that financial data with narrative to make it resonate with very different audiences between FP&A and IR?
Yeah, I mean, it's all about leveraging the data. I mean, in the FP&A world, we do two things. We tell the story about what happened last quarter, right? And so using data and systems to be able to understand what happened in a very granular way, being able to identify outliers like a market, a stage, a mode within your mode mix or things like that, where things are going wrong, being able to detect that very quickly and easily with data is going to make a whole lot of difference in the way you're going to tell the story about why you missed or beat your quarter. And then when we think about how we can use that when we look forward and when we create forecasts, well, the same inputs, the same decisions, the same data points are going to influence the way you shape your forecast. And so you can just forecast and say, hey, this is what's going to happen. Or you can use these data points to influence the business and tell them, well, if you change this in that market, this is the alternative path. And this is the better outcome for the company and for your P&L and for your business. And so using dashboards that have the right data points, that it is focused on the key metrics, as we discussed earlier, that's going to help surface, all those issues and all those opportunities and help people coming up with better insights and not just gather data. Because one danger for FP&A is to want to own and know everything about everything. And then you create, spreadsheets that nobody can use because it's just too much.
I want to drill into that a little bit more because as a data nerd, I got to say I'm a little envious of the amount of data you must have access to. I mean, Lyft has to be generating just billions of data points daily. So there's, the quantity and quality of data out there has to be. But to your point, it's a lot of it can be just noise if it doesn't drive anything that you're looking at. But finding those correlations and finding ways to tie it into forecast and coming up with something new, maybe that you hadn't seen before of, oh, wow, this is, X is a predictor of Y, or, whatever you didn't know before by having all that data. So I'm wondering, first off, maybe what's the makeup of your team between analysts? Do you have data science people on the team, or do you work with a data science group? What's the internal makeup of your team?
We're a team of roughly 60, and, most people are finance people, pure finance people. But, as I think about our analysts and our senior analysts on the team, they're very curious and very, tech oriented. They love new technology. They love data. They're very interested in the business. And so they partner with the data science team. So the data science team is doing all the heavy lifting for us. I mean, as you said, we have billions of data points every day. Like, think about a ride. We know where you're coming from, where you're going, who you are, your spending habits. And then we look at the mode, the price, the demand. So it's huge. And so part of the challenges we have as a company is to make sure we really organize this data, make sure it's consistent, it's usable, right? And so it's a team of curious people, and they keep automating the processes. We have a finance hackathon, that our CFO got started a couple of quarters ago, which is super fun. We have all those finance people on the accounting, FP&A side that are getting together and coming up with new ideas about how they can make us better, more efficient, and work, in a more automated way. So I don't have data scientists today on the team, although I think it's coming. I don't have them today, but I'm fairly sure that if you and I discuss it in a couple of years, we will have more data scientists on the team. But we have curious people that are embracing those new tech and, those new tools. Some of them are, learning about SQL and, querying. We have very complex databases, and some of them are directly querying them with complex code. So I think it's the future of FP&A again.
Yeah, and I think you nailed it. And I've had, like a couple of weeks ago, we had two teams. We had the head of FP&A and the head of data science from Wasabi, a big web hosting company, had them on and talked about how they work together. And they spoke to the same issue, that curiosity. And I think that curiosity is what makes you good at FP&A, asking why, until you dig down to the bottom. And when you're asking questions like that and you're intellectually curious and you're driven to get the answer, that's going to open up new doors and avenues to you where you're going to figure out how to get the answer. And maybe it's a stretch and something you haven't done before, whether it's a complex Excel formula or a new way to approach forecasting or learning about machine learning, or, whatever the case is, that curiosity is going to drive you.
Exactly. And, I've been through a similar revolution or tech disruption 25 years ago. I mean, I'm that old that when I started my career, people were telling us, oh, you're all going to lose your job because of the internet, right? And look at us, we're still here. And I think AI is going to be just the same, which is it's more of a new tool we're going to give our teams to be more efficient and do a better job. It's not something that is, replace business acumen. It's not going to replace, business strategy. And the fact that we need people that are hybrid between finance, data science, and business, advisory, that's not going to be replaced by any tool. It's just going to augment the team capacity.
I want to get to generative AI, but I want to kind of close the loop on this first. I'm imagining with as much data as you guys have, and you talked about, a lot of times it's not the financial metrics that are driving where the company's heading, it's the operational metrics. And with the amount of data you have, I would imagine that you guys have probably for years. Are you using machine learning in your forecasting, not just the traditional statistical models? So you're using ML to bring in exogenous factors and all these, multiple variables and everything in those forecasts?
Yes, all the operational drivers are forecast through a machine learning process, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And is your setup, since you don't have data scientists on the team, do you become a customer of the data team that is putting those together? You work together to sort of build the model and understand what the...
That's right.
Yeah.
The process is the RevOps team that includes, a lot of data scientists. They are using machine learning to create those very complex forecasts. And then we translate those data points into a financial forecast. And then we look at both together and we challenge each other on all the assumptions.
So, yeah, that's kind of the perfect setup too.
FP&A Today is brought to you by DataRails, the world's #1 FP&A solution. DataRails is the artificial intelligence-powered financial planning and analysis platform built for Excel users. That's right, you can stay in Excel. But instead of facing hell for every budget, month-end close, or forecast, you can enjoy a paradise of data consolidation, advanced visualization, reporting, and AI capabilities. Plus game-changing insights giving you instant answers and your story created in seconds. Find out why more than 1,000 finance teams use DataRails to uncover their company's real story. Don't replace Excel, embrace Excel. Learn more at datarails.com.
And you talked earlier about a lot of your analysts are learning, how to write SQL queries, and I'm sure dabbling in Python as well. And with generative AI, everybody's vibe coding now. And if you can't write a SQL query, you could put in, the basics of it and have AI write the query for you and save a lot of time, which is funny because I always say no one would ever pay me to sit in front of a blinking cursor and write code for a job, but necessity is kind of the mother of invention. And through my career, I've had to find ways to get access to systems. And sometimes that meant writing SQL queries and learning a little bit of Python or whatever the case was. But because that wasn't my day job, it would take me 2.5 hours to write a long SQL query to get me what I want, but then it wouldn't run because I left a comma out somewhere or something. And I think about going back then, if I had generative AI to just QC my code, my query, how much time I would have saved. And I'm wondering, is anyone on your team right now, are you using generative AI maybe for doing some vibe coding to get some additional kinds of reporting, or how are you using generative AI right now across your organization?
Yeah, it's obviously just the beginning, but we are using AI to automate reporting, improve our analysis. So think about variance analysis, and then improving our comms, right? So for example, we use AI to drive some initial variance explanations. Like you can dump the entire model and start to get a first pass. Honestly, it's not yet something you can just forward to your board of directors, right? And so it's the beginning, but it's very helpful because it helps you get to this first pass, which saves a lot of time. And then other things like on the IR side, Lyft has 47 covering banks, the analysts that are covering our stock, and they are producing so many reports, very hard for us to digest everything. We now dump all those reports into an AI model and ask all the summaries, the risks, the opportunities, highlights, the issues, highlight everything we need to know. And in 3 minutes, you get a very robust... AI is really, really good with those reports and extracting the information. So we use that also for consensus analysis. All those models that all those analysts are producing, you can use that to summarize and show out all the outliers, etc. So, for now, it's clearly about augmenting the team. I'm not reducing the size of the team because of AI. We're not yet there at all. And I don't think we'd be there for a very long time. But clearly, every quarter, we see new tools, and those tools have new capacities that are helping us, augment and accelerate the way we produce information and insights.
Yeah. It sounds like you guys have figured out where, obviously keeping human in the loop, but where you can get benefit. And I've got to say, I'm right there with you. One of my favorite uses of generative AI is kind of even when I was CFO, the first thing I do, I get the monthly financials and I see the variance analysis, and it's all gone through and it's been highlighted with, where all those variances are. But I'm going to go through and do my quick summary of it and make my notes off to the side. But having generative AI go through and do that first pass and say, hey, revenue's up 4%, but COGS are down 16%, something's off here or whatever. And, highlighting stuff like that and having that first pass, it's pretty amazing how quickly it can do that. And that's without even tying into pulling in GL data. And if you've got a system that's in your general ledger can actually tell you, oh, hey, by the way, we didn't have this big payment, whatever the variance is that explains it, that's where you start seeing real power. But then the other use that you mentioned is taking that like massive data dump of between, financial statements, tables, and all the narrative and all the descriptive text that goes in and organizing and consolidating. I could see that being a huge time save for IR kind of reporting. Yeah.
Yeah, it's clearly, I think, gonna change the game. By the way, when I discuss with analysts, they are also mentioning they are using it more and more on their side as well. I think it's just making everybody more efficient.
Yeah, 100%. And I'm sure, obviously, with all the reporting requirements and compliance and all that, making sure that the models aren't hallucinating is a very important part when you're doing that. So you keep a human in the loop. Are there any things that you've found or any ways to sort of combat or identify when they do hallucinate? And are you seeing the models getting better just because of whether it's the way the models are built or the way that your team is using them? How do you deal with hallucinations when you're dealing with LLMs?
Yeah, I don't think we are seeing too much of that, but that's the big reason why we need the people that are using those tools to be the experts in their field and domain first, right? And so I think it's going to be a challenge for the coming generations. Is you have to learn the basics, because you have to be able to spot the issue in whatever the AI tool is, spitting back at you. And so that's why, people are not going anywhere. It's because you still need this expertise, being able to understand the fine print and adjust whatever the answer is based on your own knowledge and expertise. It happens to all of us. Like you ask a question to AI, sometimes I ask, "Are you sure?" And they're like, "Oh, good point." It's very interesting to see, even on the GPT models, etc. We say it will spot their own mistakes, but if you don't ask, they won't. So again, very important to keep experts in the loop, for sure.
100%. Yeah. It's interesting right now because I am seeing more companies today that have budget for big implementations of generative AI, integrated into workflows, not just the employees using whichever tools they're using. And I think the year started. So last year, people wanted to learn about AI and how it might work. And then with all the pressure from leadership and boards and investors, okay, we're going to lean into AI now. And I think there started to be budget, but you're also seeing a lot of studies that some of these projects aren't working. And, the big, massive projects are, there was that MIT study that there are faults with, but it showed something like 95% of AI projects fail. And I think it's interesting right now because I think at the leadership level, there are kind of two fears that are dictating what happens. One is we're hearing about competitors, how they're using AI. There's this FOMO of we better do AI. Or we're going to get left behind. And then there's the other one that is that fear of hallucination or fear of what could happen to your data and all that. But then, and I think that all kind of sits in sort of these top-down big AI projects. But then there's the bottom-up where employers are putting the tools in the employees' hands and they're getting more and more comfortable with how to use them. And we're really starting to see efficiencies. And maybe, it's a software expense. It's not a big capital investment. So sort of labeling those efficiencies and understanding them, maybe it's hard to see if there is ROI on a, recurring user-based software expense or whatever. But how have you seen, even on your team, employee usage and adoption? Do you get feedback? Are there still some holdouts who don't want to use AI, or is everybody kind of now starting to see it? What's the kind of the mix there between excitement and then maybe an existential threat too of like, this is really cool, it's probably going to take my job?
What's interesting is everybody's curious and excited many people get back to their Excel model 5 minutes after they started. They're experimenting with AI, and then they're like, oh, now I need to do my real job, and I'm back in Excel. I mean, Excel is very deep in the FP&A culture. It's actually very surprising to see even people that are very tech savvy. They're like, oh, don't take my Excel away from me, right? And so I think it's going to be a journey. I think the worst thing we could do as leaders is to choose the tools for our teams and then tell them, now you're going to use this. I think that's the recipe for failure. I mean, guilty. I've done it. I'm seeing it. Today, we have a lot of success with a workflow automation tool. And, the team is adding more and more processes to this tool, leveraging a tool to cut a lot of the processing time. When we have complex spreadsheets, you have 20 spreadsheets, you need to put everything in one table. Now, all of that is being automated as we speak at Lyft, and there's a team behind it. And trust me, they are the people that are doing the work. They are not a VP coming in and saying, just because their boss put pressure on them on, you have to use AI or you're going to be irrelevant. That never works, right? What works is when the team comes up with ideas. And so I think our challenge as leaders is to empower our teams and foster a culture where, they're going to try and test things that are not necessarily expensive. But again, at least we have this finance hackathon. And honestly, the best ideas we had over the last 2 years are coming from that specific event. It's coming from the team themselves.
And I do want to dive into your leadership a little bit more in a second, but one last question around AI. And I think I love to hear the way that you guys are using it and the way that you're approaching it, because I do, in my day job, I'm doing implementations of AI to help the office of the CFO. And I always kind of groan when somebody comes in and their mission with AI. I understand it's technology, it's automation, and it is going to be more efficient. And if we can find ROI by doing more with fewer people, that's great. But I always hate it when people lead with, we need headcount reductions out of this. It just feels not right. And I don't mean from a philosophical standpoint. I mean, it's a big ask right now if you think of a robot is going to fully take over the entirety of someone's job. Now, there are tasks and we could find efficiencies there, but we maybe look at your crystal ball right now, and I think we're both using generative AI in very similar ways, where it's a tool for efficiency in what we're doing right now. But if you look out in the future, does it fundamentally reshape? And I'll say this about FP&A and about IR, since you're over both, but do you think it reshapes? I know they're going to stick with the Excel, but maybe whether it's the time to deliver, the amount of delivery, the depth of the analysis, do you think it reshapes how they formulate and deliver insight?
100%. I think over time, we're going to cut the processing time in half. I mean, I'm just making up those numbers. By the way, I don't have any data to back that up, but my intuition is over time, we're going to cut the processing times for the forecast, for the reporting. We're going to do a better job at, detecting patterns earlier and, bring that insight to the business teams. So yes, I think it's going to impact our work in a very meaningful way, but I think it's just going to grow the business as opposed to just shrink the teams, right? The most important part of the FP&A job is to sit next to a business leader. And that's not going to go away, even if we have all the AI tools in the world.
Yeah, 100%. Before we start wrapping up, I do want to talk about leadership, because you've been with a couple of great companies at Electronic Arts and at Lyft, and leading a large team right now. And again, this is that's why I just love finance, because you have to have this domain expertise, you have to have the technical expertise, you have to have the data expertise now more and more, but there's still that soft skill. These are still people we're dealing with. We have to manage teams. So I'm wondering, do you have a philosophy on sort of building and developing your FP&A organizations, whether it's your approach to how they're set up, to what their sort of training path is? And I know you mentioned at EA having a great development path, and maybe that's carried through, and I'm sure Lyft does something similar. Could you talk a little bit about your team structure and your philosophy around that?
Yeah, we operate in a very competitive environment, right? Hiring FP&A teams in the Bay Area is very challenging, right? There's a lot of competition, many great companies compensation can be very high in some companies. And so for a company like Lyft, it's all about, what we can offer in terms of environment to our team members. And so when we hire, we really look for curious people that are going to be able to adapt and, that are going to surface the problem pretty early. We are trying to foster a great environment in terms of, safety. I mean, people feeling safe about raising issues, challenging the business assumptions, having healthy debates with the business. They need to understand the impact of what they are doing, right? And so asking the same people to prepare the same reports on and on and on, then they don't know what's done with it, doesn't help. And so we have a fairly flat structure here at Lyft. And so we promote direct access from the analyst to the CFO, trying to make sure everybody has exposure to the management team. We are also promoting rotations, which, is always challenging, but something we really like to do. This week, we had someone from my business FP&A team going into my corporate FP&A team. And that to me is what success looks like, right? Because when you think about a career, there's maybe like, if someone wants to stay in the corporate world, there's maybe 5 levels, right? And so it's not about being promoted. It's about learning different things, learning about different parts of the business. And so that's what we offer at Lyft. And it's this career path. And then, our challenge is to give them the right tools. And so we discussed about AI. It's part of it, but that's the culture we're trying to foster.
That's great. I used to always joke that the reason I was able to move up in finance was because I was really good at Excel and PowerPoint. And I didn't realize until later that being good at PowerPoint meant I was able to actually tell the story. And the Excels do the numbers and PowerPoints tell the story. And if you'd asked me at the beginning of my career, or even in my first CFO role, what skills people starting out in finance needed to focus on and hone in, it would have been one thing. And I know we all love Excel, and I don't think Excel's going anywhere. And having that ability to do what we need to in Excel to get to the numbers is important, but there are new ways that people can get to those numbers now. And I think I want to ask this, maybe this is a 2-part question. One is on the technical sort of hard skill side, and the other is on the soft skill side. So if you were talking with your kid in college right now in accounting, talking to that next generation of finance and accounting professionals, other than the basics that they're getting in their core domain expertise education, what skills should people be focusing on to make themselves kind of future-proof and to be prepared for the coming whatever evolution happens in FP&A?
There's things that will never change. So as you said, the core, the foundational skills around, like if you're a finance professional, you have to understand accounting. You have to understand the statements of cash flow. You have to understand all those things. Like it's not a maybe, you have to do it, even if you're only focusing on FP&A. That's very important. Then the hard skills, well, they depend on, your role and what you want to do, but clearly, tech, data manipulation, complex formulas, all of that, super important. It was important 20 years ago. It's still important today. It's just the tools are different. But this mindset that you're going to leverage technology to do your job is super important. But then I think when I look at, who's successful over a career versus who's not really successful, I mean, it's all about communication and business acumen, right? So being curious, understanding the business, and then being able to tell a story. I've seen so many of my colleagues when I was, more junior, they were like spreadsheet nerds, and they could, those people that are doing all those very complex formula without even looking at their keyboard, and, everything moves on the screen and looks super cool. And you're like, oh, am I behind? But then you realize that over time, that's not very important, right? Because that's what's really important is your ability to connect with the business teams, understand what they're doing, what's important to them, how you can help them grow their business, and then how you can communicate those challenges and those opportunities. So number one, focus on your communication skills. How do you interact with leaders? That's number one.
So key. It's sometimes easy to forget when you get very good at Excel, you know what is going on under the hood where you're building all this stuff, but it's the outcome that you're being hired for is not the really cool formula. It is the insight that you provide from it. So I do think as automation moves on, the ability, it really shifts your focus to what am I doing here? Why do I work for this company? What do they want from me? And being able to provide that value rather than just building a cool, nested if statement or whatever in an Excel sheet. Yeah. Okay, well now we're gonna get to the part of the show where we bring it home with our two standard questions that we ask everyone. And the first one is, what is something that not many people know about you? Something that we couldn't learn from your LinkedIn profile or online presence?
So my family knows about it very well because I'm pretty obsessed, but I think in the work environment a little bit less. But I'm a passionate outdoor guy, so I do a lot of very long, running races, 100 up to 100 miles. So I'm very big about going out there in the woods 7-8 hours every Sunday, and I'm kind of this weekend warrior with my very modest abilities, but I'm very passionate about pushing myself out there. So something that is very important part of my life.
That's great. What a great balance too, from being just so focused on finance and all the accounting and being able to get out in the woods and go do a long trail run. That's awesome. So any events coming up that are on your calendar?
Yeah,
Any ultras?
So I just completed my first triathlon ever, and so that was super awesome in Santa Cruz, and we have a marathon with my wife in December, so very excited.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yes.
Which marathon?
In Sacramento, the California
Okay.
marathon.
That's great. That's great. Well, good luck to you on that. And are you guys going to run together?
Yes, that's absolutely. We are training together. It's pretty awesome.
Very cool. Very cool. Okay. Now everybody's favorite question to close this out. What is your favorite Excel function and why?
Before I answer that specific question, let me tell you that my team hates when I'm in their Excel models. So, I'm kind of at a point where I'm not using Excel that much, but index match is probably the obvious, this kind of a more sophisticated version of the VLOOKUP. I've been using that a lot, in the earlier part of my career. But that's pretty amazing what you can do with index match.
100%. And I'm really dating myself now because my first CFO role was back in 2007. I'm VLOOKUP till I die. But if somebody's relying on me to get into an Excel spreadsheet at this point, there's probably a problem. They've probably come to the wrong person at this point. But yeah, I know, and I've heard all the wonderful things about index match. But until I have to use it, I just VLOOKUP is one of those things you just quickly do because I was doing it back when I had to. Yeah. Well, Aurelien, I really enjoyed having you on the show and hearing about Lyft and Electronic Arts and your experience, and just really appreciated all your insights today.
Thank you, Glenn. Appreciate it. And I hope we'll discuss again soon.